Mahfouz's half a day transforms a child's first day at school into a metaphor for life's journey. Written by Egypt's Nobel laureate, this story captures how time can stretch and compress in surprising ways. In Cairo, where tradition meets modernity, Mahfouz uses a simple school story to explore how cities transform, how we age, and how life passes both slowly and suddenly. Through precise details, the new clothes, the red tarbouche, the garden lined street, he anchors us in a moment that will mysteriously expand into a lifetime. Now, let us join a young boy as his father leads him to school on what seems to be just an ordinary morning. I proceeded alongside my father, clutching his right hand, running to keep up with the long strides he was taking. All my clothes were new: the black shoes, the green school uniform, and the red tarbouche. My delight in my new clothes, however, was not altogether unmarred, for this was no feast day, but the day on which I was to be cast into school for the first time. My mother stood at the window watching our progress, and I would turn toward her from time to time, as though appealing for help. We walked along a street lined with gardens. On both sides were extensive fields planted with crops: prickly pears, henna trees, and a few date palms. Why school? I challenged my father openly. I shall never do anything to annoy you. I'm not punishing you, he said, laughing. School's not a punishment. It's a factory that makes useful men out of boys. Don't you want to be like your father and brothers? I was not convinced. I did not believe there was really any good to be had in tearing me away from the intimacy of my home and throwing me into this building that stood at the end of the road, like some huge, high walled fortress, exceedingly stern and grim. When we arrived at the gate, we could see the courtyard, vast and crammed full of boys and girls. Go in by yourself, said my father, and join them. Put a smile on your face and be a good example to others. I hesitated and clung to his hand, but he gently pushed me from him. Be a man, he said. Today you truly begin life. You will find me waiting for you when it's time to leave. Let's take a pause here. Notice Mahfouz's careful setup. The contrast between the boy's new clothes and his friends, the mother at the window, the father's words about truly beginning life. These aren't just details about starting school, they're about beginning life's journey. The high walled fortress like school symbolizes the institutional structures that'll shape our lives. Back to the story now. I took a few steps, then stopped and looked but saw nothing. Then the faces of boys and girls came into view. I did not know a single one of them, and none of them knew me. I felt I was a stranger who had lost his way. But glances of curiosity were directed toward me, and one boy approached me and asked, Who brought you? My father, I whispered. My father's dead, he said quite simply. I did not know what to say. The gate was closed, letting out a pitiable screech. Some of the children burst into tears. The bell rang. A lady came along, followed by a group of men. The men began sorting us into ranks. We were formed into an intricate pattern in the great courtyard, surrounded on three sides by high buildings of several floors. From each floor, we were overlooked by a long balcony roofed in wood. This is your new home, said the woman. Here too there are mothers and fathers. Here there is everything that is enjoyable and beneficial to knowledge and religion. Dry your tears and face life joyfully. We submitted to the facts, and this submission brought a sort of contentment. Living beings were drawn to other living beings. And from the first moments, my heart made friends with such boys as were to be my friends, and fell in love with such girls as I was to be in love with, so that it seemed my misgivings had had no basis. I had never imagined school would have this rich variety. We played all sorts of different games: swings, the vaulting horse, ball games. In the music room, we chanted our first songs. We also had our first introduction to language. We saw a globe of the earth, which revolved and showed the various continents and countries. We started learning the numbers. The story of the creator of the universe was read to us. We were told of his present world and of his hereafter, and we heard examples of what he said. We ate delicious food, took a little nap, and woke up to go on with friendship and love, play and learning. As our path revealed itself to us, however, we did not find it as totally sweet and unclouded as we had presumed. Dust laden winds and unexpected accidents came about suddenly, so we had to be watchful, at the ready, and very patient. It was not all a matter of playing and fooling around. Rivalries could bring about pain and hatred, or give rise to fighting. And while the lady would sometimes smile, she would often scowl and scold. Even more frequently, she would resort to physical punishment. In addition, the time for changing one's mind was over and gone, and there was no question of ever returning to the paradise of home. Nothing lay ahead of us but exertion, struggle, and perseverance. Those who were able took advantage of the opportunities for success and happiness that presented themselves amid the worries. Let's take another pause. The school experiences shifts from terror to discovery to complex reality. Like life itself, it brings friendships and love, play and learning, but also dust-laden winds and unexpected accidents. Mahfouz shows how quickly we adapt to new realities and how time begins to accelerate. Back to the story now. The bell rang, announcing the passing of the day and the end of work. The throngs of children rushed toward the gate, which was opened again. I bade farewell to friends and sweethearts and passed through the gate. I peered around but found no trace of my father, who had promised to be here. I stepped aside to wait. When I had waited for a long time without avail, I decided to return home on my own. After I had taken a few steps, a middle aged man passed by, and I realized at once that I knew him. He came toward me, smiling, and shook me by the hand, saying, "It's a long time since we last met. How are you?" With a nod of my head, I agreed with him, and in turn asked, "And you, how are you?" As you can see, not all that good. The Almighty be praised. Again, he shook me by the hand and went off. I proceeded a few steps, then came to a startled halt. Good Lord, where was the street lined with gardens? Where had it disappeared to? When did all these vehicles invade it? And when did all these hordes of humanity come to rest upon its surface? How did these hills of refuse come to cover its sides? And where were the fields that bordered it? High buildings had taken over. The street surged with children, and disturbing noises shook the air. At various points stood conjurers showing off their tricks and making snakes appear from baskets. Then there was a band announcing the opening of a circus, with clowns and weightlifters walking in front. A line of trucks carrying central security troops crawled majestically by. The siren of a fire engine shrugged, and it was not clear how the vehicle would cleave its way to reach the blazing fire. A battle raged between a taxi driver and his passenger, while the passenger's wife called out for help, and no one answered. Good God! I was in a daze. My head spun. I almost went crazy. How could all this have happened in half a day, between early morning and sunset? I would find the answer at home with my father. But where was my home? I could only see tall buildings and hordes of people. I hasted on to the crossroads between the gardens and Abu Khora. I had to cross Abu Khora to reach my house. But the streams of cars would not let up. The fire engine sirens were shrieking at full pitch as it moved at a snail's pace. And I said to myself, let the fire take its pleasures in what it consumes. Extremely irritated, I wondered when I would be able to cross. I stood there a long time until a young lad employed at the ironing shop on the corner came up to me. He stretched out his arm and said gallantly, Grandpa, let me take you across. The true magic of Mahfouz's tale reveals itself in its final moments. Like a mirror suddenly turned to show us not just our reflection, but all our reflections through time. The young boy who clutched his father's hand in the morning emerges to find his world transformed. The gentle garden lined street of his childhood now pulses with the chaos of modernity. And in the story's most piercing moment, he who needed guidance now becomes grandpa, requiring the same gentle help he once received. In this extraordinary compression of time, this half a day that contains a lifetime, Mahfouz weaves together multiple threads of transformation. Through the personal lens, we witness the swift journey from childhood innocence to the wisdom of age. In the urban landscape, we see gardens bow to buildings, nature yield to civilization. The social fabric evolves from the simple rhythms of family life to the complex dance of modern society. And philosophically, we confront that most mysterious of human experiences, how time can be both infinite and instantaneous. But perhaps Mahfouz's greatest achievement is how he makes us feel time's passage in our bones, through the vanished gardens, the risen buildings, the accumulated hills of refuse, the surge of humanity. We experience that same dizzying moment of recognition that strikes our protagonist. How can all this happen in just half a day? Yet, isn't that the question we all ask, looking back on our lives? Thank you for experiencing this masterpiece with us today. In sharing these stories, we hope to create a space where literature helps us understand our shared human experience. If you found meaning in today's story, consider subscribing to StoryVerse for more timeless tales that illuminate the human condition. Until our next story, may you find poetry in the passage of your own days.